Hello, and welcome to the supportive information session on blood alcohol levels. My name is Julia, and I'm one of the counselors at Addiction Services of Thames Valley. We do have some new ways to connect with us right now while we are not seeing people face-to-face for both current clients and new clients. As you'll see here, there are some extensions listed for the different things that people might be looking for. Also, the crisis supports are still in place. If you are in need of support, there are these options, the reach out line, as well as the web chat online. And the support line is for if it's not necessarily a crisis, but if you're feeling overwhelmed, stressed, anxious, and you just need someone to talk to, that is 24/7 as well. Please feel free to use that. Some tips for protecting yourself right now: washing your hands with soap for at least 20 seconds, or using hand sanitizer if you don't have access to a sink and water to wash your hands at the time. Minimizing contact with other people, so trying to keep at least 6 feet or 2 meters between people. Stay home if you're sick. And we do have a link here that you can click on if you are concerned you may have COVID-19 and you want to take a self-assessment. So we're going to start with a grounding exercise. The purpose of this is so that if you're feeling any tension and trouble focusing, it's an opportunity to ground yourself, let go of any tension that you might be bringing into the session today. So get comfortable in your chair, as comfortable as possible where you are. If you prefer to leave your eyes open, you're welcome to do that. If you prefer to close your eyes and it helps you relax more, also feel free to do that. So I'm going to walk you through what we call progressive muscle relaxation. So sitting comfortably, we're going to start with our feet. Focus your attention on your feet. If it's comfortable for you to tense the muscles as we go through, we'll do that. If it's not because of an injury or chronic pain, instead of tensing the muscle, just focus on relaxing that muscle. So starting with your toes and your feet, we're going to hold the muscles for 1, 2, 3, 4, and relax. Moving upward into the calf muscles, we're going to do the same thing. Hold the calf muscles for a count of 1, 2, 3, 4, and relax. Moving up to your thigh muscles, holding for a count of 1, 2, 3, 4, and relaxing. Your bottom, holding for 1, 2, 3, 4, and relaxing. Your stomach or your core, tensing those muscles for 1, 2, 3, 4, and relaxing. Your upper shoulders for 1, 2, 3, 4, and relaxing. Your arms and hands for 1, 2, 3, 4, and relaxing. Your face and eyes for 1, 2, 3, 4, and relaxing. And now I'd like you to scan your body and see if there's any area that is still feeling tense. Focus on that area now and imagine that you're breathing relaxation right into that area with a deep breath in through your nose and breathing out the tension through your mouth. Feel it join the rest of your body in relaxation. That is a really good exercise to do if you have trouble sleeping as well. It really does help let the brain slow down and let the body know that it's time to relax. So we're going to be talking about blood alcohol levels today. We will be talking a lot about specifics around alcohol, amounts, things like that. If you are someone who is currently trying to abstain from alcohol, this could be triggering for you. So if that occurs, please do call us. and check in with somebody before just going back to your day. The last thing we want to do is put someone in an unsafe situation. So if you do feel triggered and you're concerned, please do call us, and we will have people who are able to connect with you and help walk you through that. Also, something to be aware of is this is not us encouraging people who have an abstinence goal to return to drinking, but this is for people who are just wanting more information and accurate information about the impact of alcohol on the body and how to know. So what are some attitudes and beliefs that are held about alcohol and drugs in our society, and where do they come from? A lot of times our family and friends, the people we spend the most time with, it comes from that, society in general, as well as our past experiences. There are a lot of myths out there about alcohol, about how to quote unquote sober up. They actually did do this on Mythbusters, if you're a fan of that show. So as far as lowering what your blood alcohol level would be, i.e. what you would be blowing into a breathalyzer, you might have heard people say like 1 drink an hour and you'll be okay, you should be okay to drive. Drink a cup of coffee and it'll sober you up. Have a cold shower, drink a lot of water to dilute it, try to eat food to soak up the alcohol, or get a lot of exercise to try to breathe and sweat it out. The other myth out there is that if you feel okay, then you should be okay to drive. So a lot of those, or all of those things are incorrect. The only thing that can get rid of alcohol from the body is time. And as far as feeling okay, tolerance is very different than what your blood alcohol level is. So as far as what you're blowing into a breathalyzer, that does not take tolerance into account. And if you're being pulled over, the officer is not really going to be interested in that fact that you feel okay if you're blowing over. So we're going to talk about how alcohol impacts the body, how the body absorbs the alcohol, how it gets distributed, and also how it gets broken down, or how our body gets rid of it. So the way that we absorb alcohol, a small amount does get absorbed in the tiny capillaries in the mouth, up to 20% in the stomach, but 80% enters our bloodstream through our small intestine. So here's our lovely graphic. So you can see through the mouth when it's consumed orally, the stomach, alcohol goes right into the stomach. A little of it passes through the wall of the stomach, but the small intestine is really where the majority of it gets absorbed. So once it's in the bloodstream, the alcohol gets carried to all parts of the body, so brain, heart, liver. In the liver, as the bloodstream carries the alcohol around the body, it passes through the liver. The liver changes the alcohol to water, carbon dioxide, and energy. That's called oxidation. The liver can oxidize only about 1/2 ounce of alcohol per hour. And that's until the liver has time to oxidize all of the alcohol. The alcohol continues passing through all parts of the body, including the brain. So with the brain, alcohol goes to the brain almost as soon as it's consumed, and continues passing through the brain until the liver oxidizes everything. So what this means is that it's going to take about 20 minutes from the time you have a drink to when it's fully absorbed. However, that can be delayed if you have a stomach full of food. So food does not absorb alcohol in the way that it's going to sober someone up who has already drank, but if you have food in your stomach and then you drink, it will delay how long it takes for it to be absorbed. So this is not the same as sobering someone up. It just means that it's going to take longer for them to feel the full effects of what they've had. So the body starts removing alcohol as soon as it enters the bloodstream. Sweat, urine, and breath removes a very, very small amount. 90% has to be metabolized, which means the liver needs to process it and oxidize it. On average, it metabolizes 15 mg/% every hour. That will make more sense when we talk about what blood alcohol level and percentages mean. Some things that impact what someone's blood alcohol level is going to be. Obviously, how much you drink. The more you drink, the higher your blood alcohol level or blood alcohol concentration will be. Gender, for women, we have more water, less water and more fat in our bodies, which means that for two people, a man and a woman of the same weight, the woman's BAC is going to be probably up to about 30% higher, just because of that fact. And for weight, the less mass there is for the alcohol to be distributed in, the higher the blood alcohol is going to be. So for smaller people, alcohol is going to impact them a little bit more, and their blood alcohol concentration is going to be higher. So when we're talking about the amounts, it is important to know how much is one drink. You may have heard someone say, oh, I only had one, but it's a giant glass. So that is not actually one. So when we're looking at how much someone has had or how much you're having, it's important to know what a standard drink is. So some of the things that you might have had in the past, it can be difficult to know how much alcohol is actually in it. If it's a standard size portion, so like a beer, 12 ounces or 341 milliliters at a 5% alcohol content, that is one standard drink. However, if it's a tall can, that's going to change. It's going to be more like 1.5. And if it's a higher percentage of beer, then that's going to change how many standard drinks are in that drink as well. For ciders or coolers, if they're 5%, then it acts the same as beer. If they're 7%, then if you're looking at something like a black fly drink, that's 7% and a standard size bottle that it's sold in, that's actually more like close to 2 drinks per container. For wine, if it's 12%, 5 ounces is a standard drink. So you will notice when we used to be able to go to restaurants, a lot of times it will say either a 6 ounce or a 9 ounce option. So both of those are actually more than one standard drink. So distilled alcohol or 40% alcohol, 1.5 ounces is considered one. So alcohol is alcohol. That's something that a lot of people will argue that certain alcohols affect them more than others. However, it is all alcohol. So whether you're having 6 beers or 6 shots, it's the same amount of alcohol that's going into your body. The difference is how quickly it goes in, which can obviously make a big difference for people. Some things that can make it difficult to know how much you're actually having, things like if you go somewhere and someone has mixed a punch or a pitcher of something with various alcohols and other things in it, it's really hard to know if you're having one standard drink. As well as if you're going out and you're splitting pitchers with friends. If people keep topping up your glass, it's really hard to know how much you've actually had. Another thing are things like shooters or Jell-O shots. There could be a lot of alcohol in those, or there could be a little, depending on how they were made. So if you're unsure, and you're someone who drinks large amounts and it varies how much you drink, you may want to consider getting your own breathalyzer, which we'll talk about it a little more in a little bit. So how what your blood alcohol level is affects your behavior. At 0.05 or 50 milligrams per 100 milliliters of blood, this is what we would call mild intoxication or impairment. This used to be called the Warren range. Now it is a 3-day suspension. So if someone is at 50 but under the 80, then it typically is the 3-day suspension unless it's not their first offense. For most people at this stage, they might be a little less inhibited, some mild changes. At 100, this is where someone is clearly intoxicated. At 150, pronounced intoxication in all people. This is what I like to call the I love you man phase, where your friends start to tell you how great you are, or the opposite. At 250, it's very high intoxication or stupor. At 350, a coma, and at 500 and higher, it's likely that the person is going to die from alcohol poisoning. What this doesn't take into account is tolerance again. So someone who drinks often may have a very high blood alcohol level, but may not appear to be drunk. However, again, what a breathalyzer is going to register and what an officer is going to care about is what are the numbers saying, not how someone feels. As far as looking at an impaired driving charge or driving with over 80 blood alcohol level. So 0 drinks. Basically, there are some ways that you can lower your risk. If you want to completely eliminate the risk, then obviously 0 drinks is the best way to go. But we know for some people that's not realistic or it's not what they're looking for. So there are some ways that if you choose to drink, you can limit the amount of risk that you're putting yourself in. So for women, it's not going past 10 drinks a week, no more than 2 drinks for most days. For men, 15 drinks in a week, no more than 3 drinks on most days, with days of not drinking in between. The question that we get a lot, does this mean I can save up all 15 for Saturday night? No, it does not. That is what that 3 drinks on most drinking occasions refers to. So if you say I'm following those lower risk drinking guidelines because I'm drinking all 15 on Saturday, that is still very high risk. So again, that's throughout the whole period of a week, and we do recommend having days of abstinence in between so that your body and your liver gets a chance to really flush everything out. So some consequences of heavy alcohol and drug use. Financial, obviously, it does cost a lot. Alcohol is expensive. Family and relationships can be impacted. Our social lives can be impacted. Physical health. It's not just hard on the liver. Alcohol is hard on the entire body, and it can cause health problems in a lot of various areas. It can impact employment and education. There can be legal consequences. Our personal and emotional health can be impacted, and there are a lot of other ways that it can impact as well if it's heavy use. So alcohol poisoning, this occurs when the body's blood alcohol concentration rises rapidly to a high level, usually as a result of drinking large amounts over a short period of time. So this is if people are doing shots or drinking something very quickly. Your body does begin to shut down and causes respiratory depression, which means that you're not breathing as much as you should be or as often. So a general rule is if a blood alcohol concentration is between 200 and 300 milligram %, likely the person does have alcohol poisoning in some form. And if it's between 400 and 500, it's likely going to be fatal. So some symptoms of alcohol poisoning, the person passing out or being semi-conscious, kind of in and out of being conscious. If they're cold, pale, or their skin around their lips is turning blue. If they're vomiting while they're asleep. Slower, irregular breathing, so less than 8 breaths per minute or 10 seconds between breaths. If you're with someone who's showing those signs, 911. Every time. Don't put them to bed and let them sleep it off and leave them alone. And always roll them into the recovery position while you're waiting for help to arrive. So don't leave them on their back because if they do get sick when they're on their back, then that can go into their lungs and people can die that way. So do roll them onto their side in the recovery position, which means that if they do get sick, it's going to come out the side and not go back into the lungs. So according to the criminal code, is it against the law to drink and then drive? A lot of people would assume the answer to this question is yes. However, it's not against the law to drink and then drive, but it's against the law to drink too much and then drive. So there is impaired driving, which is one offense. Driving with a blood alcohol level that exceeds 80 milligrams, which is a separate offense. You can also be charged with failing to provide a breath or blood sample or refusing to take a field sobriety test. There's also impaired driving causing bodily harm and impaired driving causing death. Care and control is another one that some of you may have heard of before. So this would mean you maybe didn't drive the car, but you were in possession of the keys and you could have. So if someone is impaired and they think, oh, I'm just going to go sleep in my car with my keys in my pocket, you actually can be charged in that case. The reason being is that they don't know if you actually drove before you got in there to fall asleep. So that's something to be aware of, definitely. Do not have the keys on you and be in the car if you are impaired. Another thing to be aware of is if you are driving around, you come home and then you drink, within 2 hours of when you've driven, if police knock on your door and breathalyze you, that's another way that you can be charged. Because again, they're trying to avoid people drinking under the influence and then saying, oh, but I didn't start drinking until I got out of the car. So just things to be aware of. So types of vehicles that you can receive an impaired driving charge for. All of these things are things that you can be charged for impaired driving if you are using them while under the influence and you're over 80. So cars, trucks, motorcycles, snowmobiles, most people are aware of those. All-terrain vehicles or four-wheelers as well, heavy equipment, vessels, and we'll get into that a little bit more in a second, aircrafts, obviously, and railway equipment. So some of the questions that we get is, what about things like an e-bike, bicycle, horse and buggy? So e-bike, because there is a motor to it, it's up to the discretion of the officer. It doesn't specify that it has to be a certain type of motor in the law. So anything with a motor, you can be charged. Bicycle, no. Horse and buggy, no. Which you can argue it one way or another. I think a lot of damage can still be done with two of those things, but in this case, it doesn't have a motor, so it's not included. Oops, just gonna go back a second. So vessels, this is where it can get a little tricky. So what gets defined as a vessel? There's a lot of wiggle room in there. So even if it doesn't have a motor, if you can direct where it's going and it's floating on water, then you technically could be charged with impaired driving. So this means that if you're drinking and you're in a canoe, you can direct where that is going, so you could be charged with impaired driving. A lot of people think this is silly. However, there have been people who have drowned when, like a young person drowns when a parent is intoxicated in a boat. So there is a method to what appears to be madness of why these laws exist. Can you get impaired driving charge on private property? A lot of people think, no, I should be able to, use my riding lawnmower while I'm drinking, or move my car around in my own driveway, that sort of thing. I'm gonna go back a second. However, you can be charged. And if you think about this, it's sort of like if someone is running a meth lab, but it's on their own private property, are they still going to be charged? Of course. So it's the same thing. There's still a risk. Someone still could be harmed. So you can be charged on private property. According to the province, is it against the law to drink and then drive? So a little bit different. Before it was federal, and now we're looking at provincial. So there are those warning suspensions, 3-day suspension if it's your first time blowing between 50 and 80. If it's your second time, it'd be 7 days, and you do have to take the Back on Track program, which costs quite a bit of money and takes a while to complete. Third time is a 30-day suspension, Back on Track, and a 6-month interlock condition, which is the device that you blow into in order for your car to be able to start and continue driving. And all are subject to the reinstatement fee and a potential tow. Another thing to be aware of is for novice drivers. So in 2010, they changed the law that fully licensed drivers, if you're under 21, you have to have a 0 BAC, so no alcohol in the system. G1 and G2 drivers also need to have 0 blood alcohol level. So even if you are, you know, a full adult, but you have your G2 and not your full G, you cannot have any alcohol in your system. If you go more than 3 years without having your license, you will have to go through the graduated licensing, but it generally will be fast-tracked. If it's been more than 10 years without a license, you'll have to go through the graduated license programming, and there is no fast tracking. So you do have to wait a year, I believe it is, in between each stage. So can you only be charged with impaired driving with alcohol? Definitely no. There can be a lot of different things you can be charged with, which you may have heard more recently since the legalization of cannabis. But it can be any substance. If it impairs your ability to think, react, basically to drive, then yes, you can be charged. So there's 3 main drug categories. There's depressants, stimulants, hallucinogens. So depressants are things that slow down your system, things like alcohol, painkillers, and then there's stimulants that do the opposite. They speed everything up, things like cocaine, crystal meth, and hallucinogens that distort our perception. So things like LSD, acid, magic mushrooms. Cannabis does fall into hallucinogen because it affects people so differently. For some people, it can act like a depressant. For others, it can act like a stimulant. And there are people who have experienced hallucinations while using it. Where the extreme danger comes in is mixing different drugs. So a lot of times people might not think about the fact that they've taken a cold medication and then had a couple of drinks. Normally a couple of drinks would be fine for them. They'd be well under the limit and it wouldn't make them feel impaired. However, if you mix that with a depressant that's in a cold medication, you might end up being charged with impaired driving even if you don't blow over 80, because you're still impaired because of the things that are in your system. So there's a lot of reasons why someone may drive a vehicle after drinking. There are a lot of people who really thought that they were okay. They felt fine and they thought I should be okay to drive and didn't realize that they were over. Distance, so how far the person has to go. They might think, you know, I just want to move my car from the street to the driveway so I don't get a ticket in the wintertime. That still can be a charge. Financial reasons, so maybe someone's thinking like, I don't have the money on me right now to pay for designated drivers, driver DD Diamond, something like that. It's changed names a few times, but those places that will drive your car home for you. Public transportation can be tricky because it ends at a certain time of night. If someone's in a rural community, they might think like, oh, well, you know, there's not going to be anyone around. It's just me out here. There's no one that I might hit, so it should be okay. There's a lot of emotion tied to it. There's people who can take offense when someone says they don't think they should be able to drive. And just the inconvenience factor. I mean, obviously, if we weigh those things against someone being killed, it's not easy. It's easy to do the math, but in the situation, a lot of times we downplay it and we think but it will be okay this time. It will be okay this time. So not thinking that people who have been charged with this are bad, evil people, but they probably just didn't think things through. So blood alcohol level exercise. So this is something that can help you figure out what your blood alcohol level would be based on how much you've drank, how much time has gone by, and whether you're male or female. So the first one we're going to look at here is for a 170-pound male. So if you look down the column on the left-hand side, this is the number of hours that has passed since the person started drinking or had their first drink. Across the top is how many drinks they've had. So for example, if you look at the rule that we think of as 1 drink an hour, so 6 drinks in 6 hours, if we go across for the 170-pound male, they're going to be at 70. So that would be in that 3-day suspension range. So even though they only had 1 drink an hour, if they have 6 drinks over 6 hours, they still would be in that range. If we look at a 70-pound female, it changes. So for a female having 6 drinks over 6 hours, they're going to be at 100. So that is an impaired driving charge, not just the 3-day suspension. This is something that you can use if you're trying to figure out where am I at, depending on how long it's been and when I need to drive. You can also use this by seeing where the zeros stop to know what you should limit yourself to if you have somewhere to be that you need to drive to in the morning. So a lot of times people are charged the next day. They thought they did the right thing. They spent the night at a friend's house. They took a cab home, and then they get up to go somewhere at 8 a.m. the next day, and they get charged with impaired driving because they didn't realize there was still alcohol in their system. So the reason this can happen is a lot of people aren't aware of how long it actually takes for the body to eliminate that alcohol. So if you're looking at where the zeros stop, that's a good indication of where you should kind of cut yourself off if you're going to be drinking the night before and you have somewhere to be the next day. So for example, if you know you have to get up in 15 hours from the time you have your first drink, for a 170-pound female, they know that they can't go over 7. That's a long time, 15 hours, so most people wouldn't have that much time before they have to be doing something the next day. So figure it out for you what it is, how much time you have, and what you could limit yourself to avoid getting into that situation. This is a handout that we provide as well. So this tells you, depending on what your blood alcohol level is, how long it's going to be until you are at 0. So if we look at this, so the example that I just used for the 170-pound female was going to be at 100. So for her to be at 0 is going to take 7 hours before she's at 0. If she's going to be at the legal limit as far as not being charged with impaired driving, she's going to have to wait at least an hour and a half. And if she wants to avoid that 3-day suspension, then she's going to need to wait 3.5 hours. So this is kind of a quick reference. As I mentioned earlier, if you're someone who drinks varying amounts of alcohol and you mix things and you're not really sure, if you're not good at keeping track of how much you had, or if you're drinking multiple days in a row and drinking large quantities, it might be helpful to get your own breathalyzer. And the reason for that is, let's say that you were at 220 one night, it's going to be 15 hours before you are back at 0 again. If you start drinking before you're back at 0, you don't start at 0, right? You're starting to put more alcohol in your system, but there is still alcohol in your system. So then it becomes really tricky trying to figure out what your blood alcohol actually is and how long you need to wait before you're at 0. So you can purchase your own breathalyzers. You can get them on Amazon. We do recommend that you get something that is fuel cell because that is the same technology used by police, so it's more accurate. Some of them will need to be, or most of them will need to be calibrated every 1,000 uses or something like that. So it's something to keep in mind if you do purchase one. So that is it for today. Main things, takeaways from today. Basically, don't base your ability to drive on how you feel. That's a big one. Always try to do the math, and we have some charts provided that you can take a look at to figure out for your weight what that would look like. When in doubt, get yourself that breathalyzer if you really want to know for sure. Thank you so much for your time. I hope this has been informative. If you have questions, please feel free to ask your counselor, or if you don't have a counselor yet, to call the main line there and ask to be put through to someone who can answer that question for you. Thank you very much.